So slowly we can start, right? And then if some people, they are a little bit late, then still they can join us, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Again, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. My name is Andor Ulmes, and I'm representing the Bridge EU, the Brussels-based organization who is behind this webinar. And we will be very, very practical and informal today. So we will have some presentations, we will have some panel discussions, but at the same time, please feel free to jump in anytime and to ask questions or stop us and to say that actually this is not really relevant to the topic, so please change the topic and so on. So we are trying to be as much as possible flexible with the agenda. At the same time, we have an agenda which we would like to share with you in a minute, and to discuss, let's say, the education segregation in a bit more, let's say, broad way compared to, let's say, some discussions what we have been experiencing in the last years. Because the point is here that we see that actually education segregation is not necessarily managed or understood actually in the same way when it comes to different target groups, when it comes to different countries, areas. So we see really important gaps and inconsistencies which we would like to address in the future a bit more than we see it today. Hasna will make a short presentation in a minute, but the point would be as an introduction that we are working actually on this issue for years, and some colleagues actually who are sitting in this panel, they can confirm that actually many things have been introduced, like policy changes, legislative changes, even legal actions like litigation and complaints and so on. At the same time, when you see actually the practical implications, or let's say the consequences of all of these things, far, far away, we are not satisfied. So the question is now actually, apart from that, why these kind of inconsistent approaches exist, why actually the segregated education is so much persistent, and in some countries, in some target groups, actually it's even deepening. So it's even getting worse and worse. Why? So this would lead us actually to some, let's say, more long-term type of discussion. So today we are just launching this discussion. We are launching actually this dialogue with you and with some colleagues actually to understand better, let's say, the scope of these problems. But we would like to continue this dialogue, and in a very naive and idealistic way, we thought that maybe it would be helpful if we are trying to, let's say, foster some joint actions, some joint initiatives actually in this field and in some other fields as well. As you may know, actually now our organization has launched actually some other actions as well, where we are aiming actually for some joint actions. Because what we see today, that this is missing. This is also a huge gap that different organizations are not working together. Even actually they are kind of isolating themselves a little bit actually from each other. And no offense to anyone, I'm just trying to be as much as possible, of course, provocative today, but it's clear that Roma, disability organizations, migrant organizations, they are not necessarily working together actually in this field, which is bad, if I can say it actually in a very simple way. It's bad. And we need to understand why is it happening and how to improve the situation in the future, because otherwise these kind of isolated actions will go a little bit nowhere. So we don't see really, let's say, the impact on the field. And again, don't misunderstand me, this is not only the education segregation where we see that. We can go for other actions, like, for example, the housing or labor market and so on, or in general, actually, the discrimination or anti-discrimination questions, where we see that actions are very, very isolated from each other. So any ideas, any suggestions, any, let's say, particular recommendation actually on this regard would be very, very helpful also today. So I stop talking, and I would like to give the floor immediately to Hasna, who will make a short presentation about the setting the scene. So what we are going to do today. Hasna, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So my name is Hasna Sandorcel, and I will explain in 10 minutes why we need this webinar Amber has already done a great job, but I'll give more detail. So first, I would like to introduce 𝐵𝐸. So for those who don't know us, we are a Brussels-based NGO, and we offer a new approach to human rights protection, where we focus on the shared challenges of marginalized groups, including people with disabilities, migrants, Roma communities, and we work on a range of topics, including EU funds, environmental justice, child rights, social inclusion, housing, and of course, education. So concretely, we look at existing policies and legal frameworks, and we analyze them to find gaps in the equal treatment of marginalized groups, and we use this evidence to push for more inclusive policies. And today, we aim to initiate a conversation on education. Andor has already explained the aim of this webinar, but more specifically, we want to talk about Roma children and children with disabilities and migrant children in Europe and how they continue to be segregated in education. We see that these groups of children, as Anders said, face very similar challenges but are treated differently. And in this webinar, we really want to address these inconsistencies and raise awareness of the reality of these children. And we also want to foster an intersectional dialogue between stakeholders working on Roma inclusion, disability, and migration. And just to be clear, this webinar is only the first step, so don't worry, you will continue to hear from us. Without further ado, let's now get into the conversation. We first want to define what educational segregation is. It's a discriminatory practice of separating specific groups of children based on their personal or social circumstances such as ethnic origin, race, disability, migrant status, into segregated schools, classes, or educational settings. This can happen either through direct discrimination. So, for example, if you put a child with disability in a special school, this is a direct form of discrimination, or it can happen through indirect discrimination. And this is, for example, it depends. It's called spatial segregation, so it depends on where you live, and then you go to certain schools. Since we have many lawyers and experts with us today who will dive deeper into the legal and policy framework, I'll keep this slide very brief. So all children have the right to inclusive and non-segregated education based on the right to education and non-discrimination. These rights are enshrined in several key legal instruments at European and international level. I listed a few of them, but I really want to focus on the EU Racial Equality Directive for a minute, as it is a key part of the EU anti-discrimination framework, and it also has been very central in the legal challenges on Roma educational segregation, and our speakers will definitely come back to this in more detail. At the EU level, there are also several policy instruments that reinforce this commitment of non-inclusive and non-segregated education. These include the European Pillar of Social Rights and child-focused strategies aimed at reducing child poverty and social inclusion, including through the access to inclusive education. There is also broader equality and inclusion policies that focus on groups in vulnerable situations, such as I'm sure you're familiar with them, like the anti-racism strategy, the EU Roma strategic framework, the strategy on the rights of the persons with disabilities, and so forth. But I also want to highlight the Commission note on how EU funds should be used to tackle educational and housing segregation as an important policy document in this topic. Now, let's move to the key evidences. So despite legal frameworks and policy commitments, the reality for marginalized children remains very concerning. Despite decades of legal action, a recent report of the Fundamental Rights Agency showed that almost half of Roma children still attend segregated schools, and only 1 in 3 Roma children complete upper secondary education, compared to 4 in 5 in the general EU population. Inclusion Europe also reported that more than 500,000 children with intellectual disabilities in the EU are in special schools, and over 24,000 children are not even in education at all. And despite the Commission note I mentioned earlier on the fact that EU funds need to be used for desegregation, the Fury project, which we were part of, found that EU funds are still being used for projects that contribute to the segregation of Roma communities and children with disabilities. So this is just a very brief overview of recent data, but we will have speakers today who will dive deeper into these realities. And when it comes to migrant children, we still see major inequalities in access to inclusive education and in educational outcomes. The Power to Unaccompanied Minors project, of which we are part of, focuses on equal access of unaccompanied children to local services. And when it comes to education, our research found that these children have limited access to quality and inclusive education because of a range of issues. But I really want to zoom in on I really want to highlight segregation in reception and language classes. And I will do this by zooming in on Belgium in particular. So in Belgium, newly arriving migrant children in secondary education are placed in separate reception classes focused on language and learning the language. And in Belgium, it's very complicated, but you have Flanders, you have Wallon. And in Flanders, these classes are called OCAN. And in Wallon, the French-speaking part, it's called DASPA. And in Brussels, you have the combination of both. So the system works as, concretely, the system is that these kids have to learn Dutch or French first, and only after 1 or 2 years, they can enter mainstream education. And these classes are often organized in separate settings, and some cases even in different wings or even different buildings. This limits, of course, the interaction with the wider school population, and researchers have described this as a mini school within a school or as children living in two different worlds. And I have visited a school in my region, and we made a LinkedIn post about it, so I would check that out. But it was really confrontational to see that segregation firsthand. And when it comes to segregation, the research is very clear that it lowers educational outcomes and that it's not effective. And of course, especially when you learn a language, the way that you do it is by interacting with native peers. But this is not the case if you're in a segregated setting. And we also see, when it comes to being not effective, we see that these kids are overrepresented in vocational tracks or programs for learners with special educational needs. And this, of course, limits, again, their access to higher education. And instead of addressing the segregation, policy responses often focus on extra supports. For example, here in Flanders, you have the OCAN classes, and to help transition the kids from the segregated reception education to regular education, you have a system of follow-up coaches where these kids get some help from a coach by supporting them with their school's choice, their enrollments, and their entry. But we see now that the Flemish government has announced budget cuts to this coaching. And this again shows how fragile this system is, because these kids will end up with no support at all in their transition. And it highlights again the need to move away from segregated education to systems that support that support inclusive education and have built-in language support for these kids. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this slide very much and the key evidence around migrant children is that we unfortunately didn't find a speaker who was available today who could address this particular form of segregation. It seems a very difficult topic to talk about, but as I said, please don't worry. This webinar is only the first step, and we plan to organize many more events addressing this. And also, please feel free to reach out to us if you would like to have any additional resource on this topic. Then I mentioned during this presentation a couple of projects that we were part of, and this slide gives you an overview of our work in tackling educational segregation. I mentioned the Fury project and the Power to Unaccompanied Minors, but I also want to highlight the Equal project, where we support marginalized communities, Roma, disabled, and migrant people, to use community-driven strategic litigation to enforce their fundamental rights under EU law, and this includes, of course, the right to inclusive and non-segregated education. So yeah. Then This is my last slide, and the limited key evidence I have presented today shows that there are still serious gaps in addressing educational segregation for these different groups of children. We see legal gaps, meaning that anti-discrimination standards are not being applied consistently across these groups of marginalized children. For example, in the case law of the European Court of Human Rights, we see that the court recognizes the segregation of Roma children as racial discrimination and as a clear human rights violation, but the same court is much less clear when it comes to the segregation of children with disabilities and special education. I'm sure our speakers today will address this, but I mentioned just one case where this was happening. And I also want to mention again the relevance of our Equal project here to address these legal gaps. But we also see policy gaps, and this manifests itself in very siloed approaches that do not take an intersectional view on tackling segregated education. And lastly, there's also lack of data, especially when it comes to migrant children. And we all know that data is very much needed if you want to develop good policies. So I think that was it for me. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please write them down. We have a Q&A session in the end, but as Andor said, please feel free to interrupt whenever you want. And I'll now give the floor to Andor.
Okay, thanks very much, Hasna. It was brilliant. Thank you very much. And just to introduce Hasna, Hasna is working with us since last October. And she is behind this webinar. Basically, she organized this whole thing. I'm just enjoying all the results, actually, what she has been doing. So my job is much easier, of course. And what she said, actually, I just would like to highlight one particular angle, what she explained. Hasna contacted wide range of researchers, experts, actually, in the case of, or in the field of migration, to talk actually about segregated education affecting migrant children. Unfortunately, none of them accepted our invitation. There is something behind this problem. There is something which we don't necessarily understand at this moment. It's a lack of data, one question. It's a lack of awareness, lack of recognition actually of this question. That could be also an issue. There's a political risk to understand better actually this issue. That could be also a reasoning, but we need to a little bit explore more actually the situation. And one more thing, just recently in the last days, you have seen probably the media news, what happened in Brussels or in other parts of Belgium, actually, like big demonstrations and police violence against the demonstrators. And it was about education. It was about education and budget cuts, what Fasta mentioned very briefly. And it will affect actually the 𝐬𝐴N and 𝑑𝑖𝑠𝑐𝑢 schools in Belgium, but not necessarily, let's say, reducing the segregated education, but much more actually like reducing, let's say, the effort, the money, the stuff actually for these schools. So the recognition of the segregated education in Belgium is nowhere, but the budget cuts is still happening. So this is a complete misunderstanding, a complete chaos, unfortunately, what we are facing. Without further ado, I would like to invite actually our speakers who are coming from very different fields, very different countries. Okay, they are two persons from Greece, okay, fine, whatever. But at the same time, they are representing actually wide range of, let's say, thematic areas. Here, we would like to show you actually the different perspectives of segregated education. And we would like to start with Yorgos. I would like to invite all the speakers that we have around 10 minutes, actually. So I need to cut you if you are going too much beyond that. And please provoke some questions so the audience can step in anytime. Yorgos, the floor is yours. I think you have a presentation as well, right?
Yes, thank you so much, Andor. I will try to share.
Please introduce yourself as well, Yorgos, if you don't mind.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ioros Tsiakalos. I am the director of Pro Bono Publico. It is a human rights lawyers-led NGO. I'm also a lawyer myself. I'm focused on strategic litigation, mainly on Roma rights infringements. And I've been doing that work since at least 2016, also as a Council of Europe expert. It is an honor to be invited in such an important topic. This is an issue that troubles us constantly. It is also an issue.
Sorry to interrupt you. Do you mind to make it as a slideshow? Then it will be much,
of course,
better visible. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
It is an issue that troubles, I believe, all human rights defenders, and it's also this persistence and the different forms that it takes that also prompts us to question the system of checks and balances, the system of international protection, because indeed this is a persistent problem, no matter what the case law, no matter what the how vocal civil society and human rights organizations are. So these are 3 cases. I was a student back then, but my colleague and co-founder 𝐜𝐡𝐢𝐥𝐝 Alexandridis, when he was collaborating with the Greek Helsinki Monitor, was the lead lawyer that brought these cases. These are cases who are important not just for the Greek landscape, but also for the Council of Europe member states landscape. These are cases Sambanis and others, Sambani and others, and Lavida and others versus Greece. So the main issues that were asked in these cases were the Roma children separated or disadvantaged in practice? Did the authorities know, or should they have known, that separation had emerged? And was there a timely, credible, and effective desegregation plan? These were the main questions that govern all these 3 cases. 3 different timelines, but different aspects, different manifestations of the same problem. 2008, the case of Sambanis, but the problem persisted, and in the same settlement, the Aspropyrgos marginalized community of Attica, the case re-emerged through Sampani and others, and a different locality in Thessaly in the case of Lavida. 3 different manifestations of segregation. So let's start from the first one. 2008, Roma parents sought the enrollment of their children in primary education. This was back when the Olympic Games in Athens started, 2004, 2005. But the children faced obstacles and delay before accessing schooling. Different excuses, different reasons were given by the authorities. Also, non-Roma parents expressed opposition. And then, after persistence, children were placed in preparatory classes in a different area, actually, in a different building in the same school, that were only Roma children attending. The court found that the nature of the problem, the fact that the competent authorities were aware of it, and the absence of any legislation and case law domestically, that the appellants could not be held to have failed to exhaust the legal remedies, as there was no effective remedy. So that's why they appealed directly to the European Court of Human Rights. The court emphasized the importance of compulsory schooling, but not just as acquisition of knowledge, but as the integration of all children, and especially children from a minority background. The court defined discrimination, the difference in treatment of persons who are in similar circumstances, which is the indirect form of discrimination. But it was also constituted in the absence of differentiated treatment that would allow for the remedy of inequality. So the lack of a positive measure, the lack to enact these positive obligations of the state. So the court recalled that not all forms of discrimination are the same. It highlighted the jurisprudence of the court that the Roma belong to a vulnerable population groups, to a vulnerable minority, and that they require special attention because of the historic turbulence that they have encountered. So they noted that the preparatory classes were established only after the Roma members of the community attempted to enroll in the school, even though there were Roma students that were already attending, a few, but there were. The preparatory classes consisted solely of Roma students, and there were many schools with only Roma students nationwide. There were objections from non-Roma parents. My colleague was telling me that there was even a white flight phenomenon during these months, that the Roma students never went into a specific individualized assessment as to their learning needs and abilities to be placed in segregated classes. And no Roma student was transferred to a regular school after attending preparatory classes. There was no reason in being invoked by the government for this specific treatment. So the court emphasized that this difference in treatment cannot be accepted unless it can be given a clear and unambiguous manner that this must be the case. The court held that there was indeed a violation with regards to Article 14 together with Article 13, access to an effective remedy with access to education. But the fact is that the state did adhere, but only through cosmetic means. And what that meant is that the state, through execution, did create a new school that called it intercultural, mainstream, in the area of its proper use. But eventually, this school, although it was upgraded as regular under the eyes of the law, it was an only Roma student school. So the school again found that there was only a cosmetic adherence to the standards being imposed by the previous case, and they found again a violation of Article 2, Protocol 1, access to education in conjunction with Article 14, and it indicated in the state of execution that also the students that are attending this segregated school should be enrolled in a different school, and now those who are adults to be enrolled in a second chance school. But then again, another manifestation of the same problem in Thessaly, in Sofades, the fourth elementary school that was built in the old settlements of the Roma community. It was exclusively for Roma school, and although in theory non-Roma could attend, no Roma children would attend this school. The court yet emphasized that the authorities were aware of this issue, but had failed to take action. And it could not be held that it was an omission of the parents to request the transfer of their children to nearby schools. Also, the court acknowledged that these classes were not remedial or preparatory, but it was, in other words, a typical elementary school with the same curriculum, but only entirely and exclusively Roma students attended. So it found again a violation of Article 2, Protocol 1 in conjunction with Article 14. The court noted that in view of the foregoing, and even in the absence of intention, it doesn't mean that the government had an intention to discriminate, but the fact was that it did not take the appropriate measures to dismantle discrimination and segregation. For example, through the placement of Roma students in mixed classrooms in other schools in the area. And there was no objective justification of this segregation. These principles that can be extracted from these three cases is that there cannot be segregation by effect. Roma-only schooling requires that the most careful justification and cannot be normalized through administrative terminology. There cannot be passive administration, meaning that when the government is aware of ethnic separation, there is a positive duty to act, not merely to observe or explain the condition. Cosmetic compliance is also something that the court noted, meaning that changing the name of a school or saying that it's a mainstream school is sufficient when the outcome is the same, segregation. And there cannot be any vagueness in the remedies being enacted. So the remedies must be concrete, time-bound, monitored, and direct towards integration and desegregation. Just to not exceed my time, just to bring you on a snapshot to the persisting segregation today, which means that also the national institutions have failed to actually remedy this situation. We have, for example, an intercultural school. I'm showing a picture here in an intercultural school in a segregated ghetto area in Central Macedonia region, where they celebrate the International Roma Day through an ESF Plus funded project, where Roma-only students attend, celebrating the International Roma Day. And this means, unfortunately, that the scene today is even more disturbing because the system of exclusion and the culturally embedded anti-Roma rhetoric has persisted and has adapted to political correctness, tokenism, and the effect is the same, persistent segregation, also with national and EU funding sometimes, which is very, very disturbing. So these are some manifestations of the same problem.
I'm really very sorry for that. Would it be okay if you would continue actually, let's say, with some additional details in the panel discussions, because we will have another round of, let's say, discussions, because then we can save some time actually for more discussion type of elements, okay? Because it's all very, very interesting. And I would like to highlight something here, and some of the colleagues, they can confirm or they can object what I'm saying, that usually we are discussing the segregated education of Roma children more in the context of Central Eastern European countries, which is about Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, whatever. But Greece is not necessarily all in our centerfold, in the centerfold of our discussions. So what Yorgos is doing and some other colleagues in Greece is absolutely excellent, because they are at least actually bringing this issue into the discussion, that it is the same huge problem actually in Greece and in other countries, because unfortunately this is not very well known. So we need much more awareness actually about Greece, and not just talk about the Central Eastern European countries when it comes to the Roma inclusion and segregated education. Please don't forget what you want to say, Yorgos. I will come back to you, and I will a little bit even harass you actually with some questions in the panel discussion. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hasna, who is next? I think Camille is coming, right?
Yes, it's coming.
Yes, Camille, please. The floor is yours. And please introduce yourself. And now we are discussing the disability angle of segregated education.
Thank you, Andor, and everyone for having me here and for this very interesting session. So my name is Kamil Gungar. I am originally from Poland, but I was born and I live in Athens, in Greece. And I work for the European Network on Independent Living, which is a disability organization based in Brussels, led by disabled people, for disabled people. And we advocate for independent living. Let me share my screen just to make sure everything is correct, and I will continue. Can you see everything? Everything is good?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So, super. If something is not working, please let me know. So, yeah, the organization I work for is a European network. We have members all over Europe, organizations and individuals. We are across disability, which means that we are not only focusing on, I don't know, wheelchair users or blind people, but everyone. Every independent living is for everyone. We are grassroots. Some of our values are self-determination, self-representation, deinstitutionalization, and choice and control. And of course, we advocate for a lot of stuff, like access to society, social services, personal assistance, and I mean, I will not treat everything, but inclusive education is one of the things that, of course, we want when you advocate for independent living. It's not that if we close tomorrow all institutions and give personal assistance, everyone will live independently. We need to have a lot of other services for independent living to happen, inclusive education, access to employment, accessibility, access to health, everything. So we advocate for a lot of this. As I said, we have members all over Europe, and we have a very active youth network, probably the biggest youth network of disabled people in Europe, at least to my knowledge. And what is independent living? Very briefly, just So we have an idea and how this is connecting also to the discussion. So independent living is having same range of options and same degree of self-determination that people without disability take for granted. This is a quote by Adolf Ratzka, the father of independent living. We lost him, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. And yeah, so this also applies more or less to education as well. We should have the same options with everyone else. So as I said, independent living is many more things. These are the pillars of independent living. And as you will see, there is also the education part of it. So when we talk about independent living, education is crucial. And it's connected to many of the other parts. And with all that, we come to the example of Stephen Hawking. I try to be quick. Sorry if I am. I mean, I know we will continue later, but I try to make sure we will have a good discussion. So we come to Stephen Hawking example because sometimes when you talk about independent living, people say, yes, Camille, everything you say is good, but okay, you can live independently. You have good IQ. I mean, you can communicate. You can live by yourself. But what will happen with my son, with my daughter? They have, I don't know, intellectual impairment, something else. They cannot communicate. You know, what will happen when we die? This is a very common mantra. And yeah, so I try to bring the example of Stephen Hawking. I think everyone knows him. In the right environment, the services and the right approach, and the support, of course, that he needed, he was able to be the world famous scientist we all know. But in the wrong environment, he could be in an institution considered finished. I mean, this could be also in Greece and in many other countries. And the same logic applied to inclusive education. It is possible for everyone, even though some people say, no, inclusive education is for people like you, but my children cannot go there, or these people cannot go there. They need to go, I don't know, to a separate environment because they will get better support. But we know, and we know from examples, this is not our fantasy, that inclusive education is possible for everyone. If you give the right support and the right individualized approach to every student. Very briefly, my experience. So I attended special education until my university years. So I went to a special school, a primary and secondary school. I mean, I was okay, but I mean, I could easily understand it was not the environment I should be. We were only disabled people. The lessons were not on the level of a regular school. I could understand that. For me, it was easy to be like the best student in the school and without much of, I mean, I was okay, good student. I like to read and stuff, but still, you know, it was too easy. And, you know, we still missed some classes. And there was also this annoying part when sometimes you get visits from other school, non-disabled people, in order to get, in theory, to connect and to have an interaction between disabled and non-disabled children. For me, I was feeling like I am in the zoo and someone is visiting to see, you know, a gorilla or something. So I didn't like this very much, and you know, it was a bit strange. And when I went to university, which was the photo is from my graduation from university. This was a mainstream at university. Of course, in the university I didn't really have much support back then, because that's quite more than 10 years ago, and it was a bit difficult for me to adapt, because in special education, okay, you have some transport, you have some people working there, so in theory you get at least basic support in order to be able to do what you need to do. But in university I didn't get that, so it was the transition was a bit kind of challenging. I needed to learn how to swim in an environment when I was the only visibly disabled person in my year, in my class. I mean, I did. I am lucky and privileged in general. I am a good student. I have, you know, I got support from my family, and I am my fellow students. So I did, and I was one of the best also in my years in university. But this is not I am privileged, but this is not the case for the average disabled person. Many people face many barriers, and when moving from higher education to employment also, and also, I mean, of course, from school to universities, Many people quit universities because they cannot continue. There is no sufficient support, stuff like that. I remember even in the university, very often I needed, to rely and to ask other people to help me, which is not their job, like other students. Or there were some classes that I needed to do online on internet because the room was not accessible, stuff like that. Now things are improved quite a lot. I mean, we are going to a better direction. So this is the slide about it. The photo we see is from my high school in 𝐬𝐿𝐴. This is a special school. You see the right side, this yellow thing. It is a ramp that is supposed to get you to the main floor, and then you have elevator and stuff. So yeah, I was going to this special school in 𝐬𝐿𝐴. And I mean, since then the situation is better in Greece, and not only in Greece. The progress compared to my times is it's significant. There is support for people. There are parallel support, and a lot of people in my condition today don't go anymore to special schools. They go to the regional ones if they are accessible. In my case, for example, we didn't even have accessible school next to my home back then. And I mean, even today, most mainstream schools are not super accessible. But I mean, if you get the support, you can try to do it. But there's still a lot of segregation. Special schools continue to exist. And especially for those with high support needs, intellectual impairments, psychosocial disabilities. And I mean, even if you have only physical disability, if it's too heavy, I mean, heavy in quote, it's still, they are directed there. We hear sometimes families of non-disabled people saying, we don't want a disabled person studying in our regular class because our children will stay behind, which is not the case normally, but I mean, that's what they say. And I mean, I know also a case when a young lady had a young daughter with disability, and she sent her to the kindergarten. She wanted, first she sent her to a special one, and she didn't like at all the situation. Her daughter was, not benefiting in any way. She was, on the contrary, staying behind. So she wanted to move her next year to a regular one, and she faced a lot of resistance to move to a regular education, because from special school they were saying to her, no, don't do that, this is bad for your child, because of course they don't want to lose the money and everything. And also from the national system, in order to accept you to a regular school, you need to go through some evaluations and stuff. And of course, it was very stressful for the lady to go with her daughter to be sure that her daughter will be approved for a regular school. In the end, she went, she was approved, and she is now happy in this regular school. And they did also some works to make it a bit more accessible, and she has some support, but it was challenging, and a lot of families are discouraged to do that. Support services are very often insufficient. We hear examples when you have one person for 2 or 3 disabled people in the regular school, which is, of course, not a good case, because maybe you need much more support with notes, with food, with toilets, and one person cannot do many people if it's more than one disabled people, which many often may have different disabilities also. Accessibility and staffing remain. Even in special school, we had staffing issues. So imagine in a regular school, there is a lot of problems. And as I said, people are directed to special school for better support, as they are saying. There is a UNCRPD framework, of course. Yeah, I know. I need to finish now.
I need to stop you very, very soon, because
then... but 1 minute and I am done.
Good. Thank you.
1 minute. Thank you. Sorry. I just have to say that there is the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is very clear about inclusive education, with the General Comment number 4 and the Article 24, and independent living, of course. These are very connected. There is no independent living without special education. And I will finish with this slide, I think. Why segregation matters beyond school? Because there is fewer opportunities to build, to connect with people. Disabled people don't see non-disabled people, and they develop some insecurity issues and stuff, that I am not able to do this and that. Non-disabled people don't see disabled people, and they grow up and then they see us as aliens, and they are not prepared, to interact with us. And of course, this happens also in the working environment. There is a reduced exposure, from both sides. There is very low expectation to disabled people, and also very smaller admissions to higher education and employment because of segregation, and the transition is super difficult. So the message is to promote inclusive education for everyone, to follow CRPD, and that disabled people should not need extraordinary determination and family support or like to go to school, but they should get, the support they need to do that. So yeah, I close here. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Camille.
It was a bit
Thank
messy,
you.
but I wanted to be on time.
No. It was great. It was absolutely great. But we will come back to you. I mean, this is not the end of the story, so don't worry. Just we will come back to you actually with some additional questions. Thank you very much. And I just would like to add something that in the Fury project we explored. Colleagues there explored actually an important element that their EU funds are supporting heavily segregated schools for people with disabilities in Greece, unfortunately. So if colleagues are interested, please open the Fury report and you will see actually some examples where actually a couple of hundreds of millions of euros have been already used actually in Greece actually for segregated schools.
Unfortunately, as we saw also with Yorgos and Roma schools, this is happening, yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Hasna, who is next? Help me.
Gabor.
Sorry?
Gabor, if he
yeah, Gabor, please.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, Gabor, the floor is yours, and just please try to keep the timeline. You don't have any presentation, right, Gabor?
I have.
Okay, please share your screen.
I even have two presentations. So
no. One is enough, huh? One is enough.
Hello everyone, my name is Gábor Daróczi, and I'm that Hungarian Roma person who lives in Malta, and our foundation, which is called Human Dignity in Action, is established in Belgium, and we are working in Malta, Hungary, Slovakia, and Ukraine. But why I was asked for this short presentation, it's in connection with my past, which is the work what we did regarding the 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐥𝐝 school case. Do you see my screen? Okay, perfect. So you need to know that I was working for the Hungarian Minister of Education around 20 years ago. And it was very, very important for us to bring a good case for desegregation. So the story what I brought to you today, it's a very simple. With the use of AI, I try to put this into a very simple and easily digestible story. So this is the map of Nyíregyháza, which is the 7th biggest Hungarian city with 120,000 inhabitants. With a visible number of Roma minority there. And there is one part which is practically at the edge of the city. Actually, this is a real map, and this is the real happening. So that was a originally built place for the cavalry. I hope that you know the only Hungarian word everyone knows. These are the hussars. But this building were built for them, so it have never planned to be built for families. Although after a while, only the poorest, which meant that time Roma, started to live there. And a little bit more than 150 years ago, Roma started to live there in a bigger amount. And as far as we know, from the 50s, they started to use that for permanent housing for Roma families, and that's why it's the name. We don't know exactly when the permanent schooling started in one of the buildings, although that it was built at the end of the 19th century. but we know for sure that around the beginning of the 90s, it became a fully segregated schools. But it has never been a big school, never ever. Not because simply of the building, but because of the needs. And actually everyone who could leave that part of the city, they went to another part of the cities for schooling. And we know for sure, I will come back to this. And actually the picture what you see, it's AI version of the real school. So this is how it looks like. And as I told, in the beginning of the 2000s, I used to serve the Minister of Education as the Ministerial Commissioner responsible for the integration of Roma and disadvantaged kids. And I had a task to approach local governments and try to convince them to start doing integration. And we didn't ask why they have segregated schooling. We did not ask what is the benefit of segregation for the community. We didn't ask anything. We offered two things. Direct help during the desegregation process and money. And the money had two versions. One is EU funds. So we directed that time, if I'm not wrong, 50 million forint. And that time that was a serious amount. And we also offered a new per capita financing system in order to sustain the desegregated version. And I don't remember how many times I had a meeting with the that time local government, and in 2007 they desegregated the school. They simply closed it. And thanks to this change, they introduced a school busing, which collected children within this 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐥𝐻, within the ghetto, and they disseminated into, if I'm not wrong, 3 different schools, several different classes. So it meant that in each and every school, there were no more than 2 or 3 kids from the local, from the 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐥𝐻, no more. So practically these children were invisible for the system. Please don't you forget that we are talking about 120,000 inhabitants locality, and we are talking about 110, 20 kids. So practically these numbers are invisible. But in 2010, there was a change, both on national and on local level. And one of the first change was from the local government to donate the building to the Greek Catholic Church. It has nothing to do with Greece. I'm just telling this, so it's the name. It's not Orthodox or anything. It's a tiny Hungarian type of Catholic Church. And at the same year, the local government stopped the school buses and offered the monthly ticket for the families, which is not the same. One was to collect kids and to offer direct service, practically door to door. The another one that they could use the local services for free, which were not meant to transport children at the beginning of the school and then to collect them, bring back them. And at the same time, the local government ended all the incentives. So they stopped using these funds I was mentioning. So, at that time, I was not working for the ministry any longer, obviously, but I was a head of a small NGO called Chance for Children Foundation, CFCF. And these are the AI version of my colleagues. From left to right is Erzsébet Mohácsi, who was the founder of the foundation, Adél Kegye, who was the head of the legal department, and Katalin Stojka, who was one of the most important field worker, and they did nothing else but went on the field and they met families, they listened, and they tried to collect stories from the field. So it's not only something on paper, but real people's real stories. And we started a trial. Adil represented the case and the families in front of the court, and we won. We won twice, the first instance and on the second instance. But it went to the third level, to the Curia. And, oh, sorry, one important story. And that time we have the most omnipotent minister responsible for everything. It was called Minister for Human Capacities, and he was responsible for everything: youth, churches, health, a big part of education, civil societies, sport. Once I counted 17 different things. And that time, although that he was not asked, he presented himself on the at the Curia as an acting minister, and for some unknown reason, the judge gave him the possibility to talk. Although that later they said that it shouldn't be counted his testimony, but it still became part of the process. And we lost the case. We lost the case in 2015, and it's sad that the education in a church-run school based on parents' voluntary choice for religious reasons does not constitute unlawful segregation if children suffer no disadvantage and the same quality of education is ensured. And this sentence, it's so untrue in every part of the sentence that I cannot tell you. So it has never been the parents' own choice. That was the closest school. And we know from the stories that parents were blackmailed to bring back their children. And we know for sure that they did suffer disadvantage because they have never received the same quality of education. So the whole story wasn't true. And this picture is an actually front page of a then existing and then biggest daily newspaper. And we were on the front page with Adel. And this is in the background, this is the building of the Curia. And I was explaining that time that this is something which shouldn't happen. And I said that I wasn't surprised if the Commission will have something against this, which happened a year later. So the Commission started an infringement procedure against Hungary. And we recently celebrated the 10th year of the anniversary of this change. But the problem is that the infringement procedure is still in place and nothing has changed. And I keep on explaining that in this case, if there is an infringement procedure for 10 years, the effect is precisely the opposite as it should be, because it tells everyone, including another country's ministries of education, that you might segregate because nothing will happen. Because there is an infringement procedure for 10 years, and look, nothing happens. But in the case of Nyíregyháza, there are at least one more story, which was written.
I have to stop you. No. Can you explain this story in the panel discussion? Because that's another story, which is a very, very important story, but okay. I would like to ask you to do it actually in the panel discussion, because it's absolutely critical that people, they know actually this part of the story as well, okay?
I'm just would like to show the picture of Lottie.
No.
But I will come back then. Okay.
You will come back to this whole thing, okay? And please
Okay.
don't forget to show these slides. What is
What
important
was last sentence? The
Yeah.
school is still existing.
Yeah.
The school is still segregated. Right now, it has around 100 children in 8 classes, and practically nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Except the government, which was changed almost a month ago. And we are really looking forward to see what it means in case of this school.
Absolutely.
But I will come back with the full story and something what we were part of and what we tried to develop on our level, how to target segregation.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Gabor. That was brilliant, especially you and Hasna, you are both using actually brilliant drawings, which is great because it's much better, much easier to understand actually the stories. What I would like to highlight here is that only in the case of Roma or in the field of Roma inclusion, the infringement proceedings have been launched against 3 countries, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. But it's not happening in the case of disability. It's nothing to do actually with the case of migration and even some other groups. This is also showing actually the huge gaps, inconsistencies, how even European institutions are approaching actually this question. The issue is absolutely existing and visible in all areas, but still only, and don't misunderstand me, I'm very much appreciating that at least in the field of Roma inclusion actually it's happening, but why this is not happening in other fields, why there is no any other legal actions in other fields, that's still an open question. And let's not even discuss actually why only 3 countries, why Romania and Bulgaria, for example, or even Greece is not in the picture, where very, very similar things are happening when it comes to segregated education. That's also an open question for the future. Right, Hasna, help me. Who is next?
Yeah, hi. Great.
Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here to talk about the role of the Race Equality Directive in this really important issue. So my name is Sushila Math, and I'm the Head of Legal at Systemic Justice, which is an NGO registered in the Netherlands, but we cover the Council of Europe region. So we're focused on shifting power to communities affected by racial, social and economic injustice by using community-driven strategic litigation as a force for structural change. My most recent previous positions were actually at Open Society Justice Initiative, where I was in a couple of equality teams and ultimately led the programme's racial justice work across Europe. And it's in this context that I began working on issues of segregation and in particular the racial discrimination of Roma children in the education system in the Czech Republic. And it's also where I met Miroslav from Avanomenka, who will be sharing a panel with happily later on. Just to mention quickly, I also worked for many years on other issues, including challenging Denmark's so-called ghetto package of laws, which essentially targets migration background neighbourhoods. So it is of relevance to the migration background question, which I'll be touching upon as well. So these are the work streams that I'm going to be drawing upon for my presentation. So if we go to the next slide, it's hard to know where to start with the story of segregation in the Czech Republic, but let's start with the landmark decision in the European Court of Human Rights of DH and others against Czech Republic, which was delivered almost 20 years ago in 2007. Obviously, this is a case under the European Convention on Human Rights, but in considering the case, so it was taken under, it was decided by the Strasbourg court, but the court did note the provisions of the EU's Race Equality Directive. And this was a case that was brought by 18 applicants who had been placed, Roma applicants, students who had been placed in so-called special schools, which were originally meant for children with learning disabilities. And in effect, they received inferior education to people in mainstream schools. And the court noted, as I said, the provisions of the Race Equality Directive, which, as Hasna mentioned, covers both direct discrimination, which is essentially less favourable treatment on grounds of racial or ethnic origin, and also indirect discrimination, which is where the rules appear neutral, but they put a group at a particular disadvantage that cannot be justified. And we'll see later on that this DH case was also taken into account by the Court of Justice of the European Union when making a decision about the Race Equality Directive. So it's a very relevant starting point for both. So essentially in DH, the court found that notwithstanding the fact that special schools had not been created for Roma children and the rules didn't make any reference to ethnic origin, on the basis of statistics that were submitted by the applicants, there was a disproportionate number of Roma children in special schools, and that gave rise to a strong presumption of indirect discrimination. And the court found that there was no objective or reasonable justification for this. So it noted, for example, that it wasn't sufficient for the Czech government to argue that the children were tested before they were put into these schools, because it found that there was sufficient evidence that there was at least a danger that the testing was biased against Roma. So if we go on to the next slide, with strategic litigation like this, although this is and was a massive victory, getting a successful judgment doesn't necessarily change anything on the ground. So implementation of a decision is a really big part of this work. The Czech government did proceed to abolish the legislation on special schools, and it does comply with the monitoring mechanism of the European Court of Human Rights, which is action plans that are submitted to the Committee of Ministers. But we knew, because we were still in touch with 𝐸𝐻𝐸𝐻, that nothing had actually changed on the ground, and the practical realities of segregation continued. And this is the reason why, separate to the Council of Europe procedures, the European Commission launched the infringement proceeding against the Czech Republic in September 2014, and this is under the Race Equality Directive, so it does have a broad level of protection, and it also does cover education as well as lots of other spheres of influence. Infringement proceedings are a form of legal action that the European Commission can take against a member state, and ultimately it can ask the Court of Justice of the European Union to impose financial penalties for failing to comply with EU law. So the Commission began these proceedings, but because the Czech government continued to engage in reforms, including in 2016, there were a whole bunch of measures taken, including things like changing training for teachers, funding, methodology and legislation, there was pressure on the EU Commission to close the infringement proceedings. So if we move on to the next slide, we produced 2 research reports, primarily with 𝐸𝐻𝐸𝐻, based on both community-based research and desk-based research, showing that segregation continued to persist despite all of these measures, and telling the stories of parents explaining what the barriers were and what was happening in practice. So if we move on to the next slide, some of the reasons that segregation persisted included discrimination in the enrolment process. So, for example, Roma children were subjected to testing that others were not before they were even enrolled in schools, which was not a requirement. A lot of them were actually put straight into practical schools, which were kind of replacements for special schools, without even being tested, which is against the law. There was continued use of these old diagnostic tests that were biased against Roma. There was widespread bullying against Roma children, which was meant that Roma parents didn't want to enroll their children into mainstream schools or keep them there. And there was also evidence that mainstream schools were introducing practices to deliberately keep enrolment of Roma children low. So, for example, they were asking for money for different aspects of school life, which many Roma couldn't afford. So if we move on to the next slide, we presented these reports to the EU Commission, and we advocated for it to carry on with infringement proceedings on the basis that the state was failing in its duties to address these issues and was essentially tolerating a resurgence of the practices that led to the DH case. So in October 2024, the Commission did decide to carry on with infringement proceedings. It sent an additional letter of formal notice to Czechia, underscoring that the segregation continued and saying that the Race Equality Directive strictly prohibits racial discrimination. We'll ask Miroslav about the current position shortly, but if we move on to the next slide, in relation to other infringement proceedings. So in relation to Slovakia, in August of last year, Advocate General 𝐜𝐡𝐢𝐥𝐝, who is a court advisor, issued a really good opinion finding that segregation in the form of disproportionate numbers of Roma children is discrimination of itself, whether that's in a special school with a reduced curriculum or in mainstream schools with full curricula. And importantly, she found that member states have a duty to eliminate segregation altogether rather than just try and eliminate it. And she found that, like in 𝐸H, statistics are sufficient to give rise to a presumption of discrimination, and that the state cannot rebut the presumption or justify segregation by saying that it's because Roma are in a generally disadvantaged position in society, so they live in residential segregation, or they, or indeed that the government tried to take some measures. That's not enough. That General said that there is indirect discrimination in breach of the Race Equality Directive, and we'll wait to see whether the Court of Justice of the European agrees. If we move on to the next slide, we've been talking about Roma segregation so far, which of course is a recognised ethnic origin. But this applies to other ethnic origins as well. So the Race Equality Directive can be used in that way. But also talking about migration background, I just want to mention briefly the decision of December of last year of the CJU on Denmark's ghetto package, because that is based on a concept of non-Western immigrants and descendants. And to pull out a couple of points from this decision, the CJU made it clear that although ethnic origin cannot be determined on the basis of a single criterion like country of birth or a parent's country of birth or nationality, those things can be taken into account when you're considering whether there has been discrimination on the basis of ethnic origin. And if we move on to the next slide, basically what the court found was that even though non-Western immigrants and descendants could be thought of as referring to lots of different ethnic origins, actually that doesn't preclude a finding of discrimination on the basis of ethnic origin. And it referred back to the Belgian case of Ferren, where the court said that the court in that case had not ruled out that a general term like allochtonen, which is used in Belgium and Flanders and these other regions, as essentially referring to people of foreign origin, that can be sufficient to give rise to kind of ethnic origin under the Race Equality Directive. And so basically it depends on the particular circumstances of the case, but migration background could be covered by the Race Equality Directive. And if we move on to the next slides, just to kind of conclude, the court actually took into account 𝐸H in reaching this decision. If you just click again, Hasna, please, in a full circle kind of moment for today, it reaffirmed that discrimination on a person's ethnic origin is a form of racial discrimination. It's particularly invidious, and authorities must use every possible measure to combat racial discrimination, racism. And if we so we can end with these takeaways on the last slide, which is essentially that the directive, a reminder that it guarantees broad protection against a particularly odious form of discrimination with dangerous consequences. It's not necessary that it's just one ethnic group that is discriminated against, so it might cover all migration background discrimination. Statistics can be enough to show indirect discrimination, and segregation cannot be justified, including because of the difficulties that the government faces in eliminating it. So think about using the Race Equality Directive in your court proceedings in domestic cases, and also consider advocating for infringement proceedings by the EU Commission. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, Sheila. It was really, really very great. I would immediately jump into the panel discussion, and I would continue actually with you, if you don't mind, because again, as we said it at the beginning, and Hasna highlighted it very much, actually, that we see a huge gap in the field of migration, as the recognition, the awareness is nowhere, let's put it in this way, compared to even to other fields. What do you think? What can be done? So what is the missing element here? More data collection, more research, more awareness raising kind of political campaigns. So what should be done actually that this field, the segregated education for migrant children, would be better understood or better, let's say, recognized?
Sure. So I think the problem is that what you're talking about is really reflective of trends that I've seen across the region over the past decade, where basically we're shifting from more easily recognizable discrimination against particular groups to things that seem to be justified, but they're contemporary forms of racism, right? So the excuses or the justifications that seem to be neutral that governments put forward. So they say that they're doing things for integration, for example, like what Hasna was talking about, saying that, oh, this is actually because these children, they don't have the right language skills, or it's actually because they're not integrated properly, right? And we're doing this for the good of people, we're doing this for social cohesion. But actually what we're trying to do in the ghetto package case is to show that discrimination is not integration. And actually we've got a really good, again, Advocate General chapter opinion saying that, you know, where you have a disadvantaged group that you think is not integrating into society, the answer is not to discriminate against them. You need to give them positive measures if there is actually even an issue. Often there isn't an issue, it's just an excuse, right? But if there is, well, you need to integrate them, like you were saying, and they need to be included and given that same superior level of education, not an inferior level of education. And the way to do it really, I think, is to push the boundaries in case law, take more cases like this and show that this is racial discrimination, even though it looks like it's lots of different ethnic groups, it's still racial discrimination. So I think we need more litigation and we need to push these arguments. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That would immediately lead the discussion to Anna. Anna, if you don't mind to jump in. Because we see also, let's say, a bit of gap or inconsistency when it comes to the legal actions in the field of Roma or in the field of disability rights. So when it comes to the segregated education of this, children with disabilities, maybe I'm wrong, but we don't see actually the same weight in legal actions as compared to the Roma. Would you agree with that, or you would see it differently?
Thank you so much, Andor. Hello again. I think I will not share my presentation because it's a panel discussion, and I think I would be more involved. It's fine. It's fine.
To show some slides. Yeah, sure. No, of course. And I would like to invite also the participants. Please put your questions in the chat, or again, ask any questions. Actually, what you want to raise.
So, okay, are my slides currently shared? Can you see them?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. So I will not spend any more time on the case law because it might be somehow boring, and I will surely agree with you, Andor, that there is a kind of different trends and results, and inclusive education of children with disabilities sometimes is less vocal and sometimes could be even less attainable. And for example, from the European Court of Human Rights, we see divergence from CRPD standards in some cases. We also see the case of Salai versus Slovakia, where Validity Foundation has contributed with a third-party intervention. And for example, this case is a very good example to see that while testing was considered as a biased from the perspective of ethnic background, it was not considered as problematic from the perspective of disability. And I really want to refer to the ground causes. I've been thinking about it since we talked last week. Of course, we have a very good judgments from the European Court of Human Rights that were some years ago, like against Turkey, and established that reasonable accommodation was indeed something to be considered by the state parties, and also against Italy, where the court held that budgetary restrictions that was mentioned earlier today should be equally distributed towards children and children with disability and without disability. But again, with the children with disabilities, we often see the structural barriers, and as a lawyer, I should be very honest that these structural barriers are sometimes impossible to address in individual cases, and that's why when we discuss the joint advocacy for children with disabilities, for Roma children and migrant children, these structural barriers could be very well addressed in joint advocacy. And what do I mean by structural barriers? We all know that inclusive education in the disability field, before it was integrated in the CRPD UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, there was a history, and this history was based on the medical model, and within this history, inclusive education was very much reliant on the individual needs approach, and sometimes we hope that individual needs approach is currently overwhelmed with the anti-discrimination equality approach, but we still see, and we see that, for example, I just found yesterday there is a concurring opinion in the GL versus Italy case when the judge is simply saying that, oh, for the individual needs of a child with disability, segregated education is still better option. So we really need to address this inherited problematic issues in the joint advocacy. And what I mean by joint advocacy, let's take the problematic issue of reasonable accommodation, because reasonable accommodation is the biggest issue and problem why children with disabilities are denied inclusive education, because well, international forums and courts consider that the national authorities are in a better position to decide what money to allocate, or even worse, the resources that are required are deemed overburdening the state budgets. But here is the hidden problem. If we take reasonable accommodation obligation out of the context as anti-discrimination measure, and if we use it to compensate for the lack of accessibility standards that is a driving force in CRPD, then of course reasonable accommodation would almost always be very expensive. So the topic for discussion would be, what are the accessibility standards that could have been advocated jointly for children with disabilities, for migrant children, for Roma children, and if these accessibility standards could be somehow harmonized, then the work for us, for litigators who litigate for inclusive education for children with disabilities, would become more realistic. Another structural barrier, what I observe, is misreading progressive realization obligation, because states frequently justify continued existence of special education and segregated education as a part of gradual transition towards inclusive education. But CRPD committee in its general comment number 4, of course, states that parallel systems cannot exist because inclusive education needs that the budgets are transformed, fully made into the human rights approach. And the topic for today's discussion, I would propose again, so what are the core obligations that could not be avoided by this transitional period justification, and what about the budget transition strategies? And here I'd like to indicate a very good criteria proposed by the European Committee of Social Rights in the case versus Belgium, where the progress of introducing inclusive education was measured through a reasonable time frame, measurable progress, and financing consistent with the maximum use of available resources. So at least some starting points for us to measure whether this transformation is really progressing. Another structural issue I wanted to raise is segregation and versus quality inclusion. And here, I think Georges mentioned the cosmetic compliance. And in the disability field, we have absolutely same issue. For example, children with disabilities are placed in the so-called mainstream schools, and nothing is provided, and it's still perceived as inclusive education, but it's against CRPD standard, which mentions that there's no binary approach between exclusion and inclusion, because among them is a segregation, integration, and none of them is a full inclusion. And it's again confusing that the European Court has different approaches. In some cases, it mentions that only presence of a child in the school could be some kind of considered as meeting the standard, while in other cases, more progressive cases, of course, it's not enough. So topic for discussion I would propose today would be to analyze the identify common quality inclusive education standards for children with disabilities, Roma children and migrant children. And last but not least, what we've been discussing last week is that segregation in schools could be regarded as a continuum of harm, and we lawyers often miss the point where we could have detected the threats of violence, the threats of institutionalizations, the threats of ill treatment in the school segregation cases. And there are two recent case laws I wanted to mention. It's one from CRC committee. I was personally involved, where the children stayed institutionalized for many years because the segregated school was not considered as a grave violation in itself. And against ECHR case against Moldova, orphan 15 years old a child was placed in the institution, again because it was not considered the segregation schooling before as a grave violation. So for discussion, I would propose that segregated education and institutional placements addressed as a single continuum of a harm and not in isolation, and the policies must connect these two violations. So I think this is all for me, and I'm ready I'm ready to answer questions, if any.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was absolutely great. I just would like to highlight one angle from your presentation is the progressive realization of rights, and because this is again a very common argument actually, which has been used actually across all target groups. As, for example, investing in segregated education, it's part of the progressive realization of rights. And we will come back to this in a minute because Gabor started to talk about the use of EU funds here. And this is particularly actually a very, very difficult and important question, because unfortunately, this is how some policymakers, they are addressing these questions, that we need to invest in institutions, in segregated education, and in other, let's say, entities, because this is part of the progressive realization of rights. So at a certain point, people, they have the same rights as others, but not now, because we are in the middle of progressive realization of rights, which is absolutely unacceptable, because this progressive realization discussion is happening in the last 30, 40 billions of years. Thank you very much, Anna. Miroslav, I would like to ask you to say a few words, because you have been already actually, I don't know, mentioned by Shell actually before, which is, and Miroslav is working with us in different projects, but your role is particularly very, very important, because you are bringing actually one extremely important angle of this whole discussion about the community mobilization, what the community can do, how to mobilize the community actually for addressing segregated education. And to be very honest, actually, and Anna, you may contradict me if you don't agree with me, but in the case of disability communities, we don't see the same movements. Absolutely not. So the disability communities, they are not stepping up in the same way actually against the segregated education, what we see, for example, with the Roma communities in Central Eastern European countries. I'm provoking you, so you can come back and you can, let's say, contradict me. But Miroslav, would you mind to say a few words actually what you are doing at the community level? Thanks very much.
Okay. Before I start my short presentation, I will actually highlight what we are doing. We are the community organizers, and we introduced some method of community organizing, empowering of people instead of service provision. And we choose actually the theme of education of Roma, particularly the implementation of DH case in Czech Republic. So we are following the DH case from the beginning almost up to now, and we made some Rule 9 submissions to Council of Europe, and also we are reporting to the DG Justice about for the infringement purposes and so on. And we are also we are not actually our mission is not the litigation, but mostly the advocacy and empowering of the communities. But it comes actually together. We didn't realize actually we will be litigators in some time, but you know, it brings actually, you know, in meantime actually it brings all this actually in the time. So I would like to talk. I don't know if you see the presentation. Yeah, you see. Okay. The speakers talk about the law, about the cases, about the directives, about the judgments, and we know that we don't have enough relevant cases for discrimination of the disabled people or children or the migrant children, but we can see the same pattern of the discrimination as the Roma children. So we can imply actually all these cases, we can actually easily imply actually on the discrimination of these groups. But I want to, you know, when I was thinking what I will talk about, I was thinking actually the important question actually, why after all these actually rulings and, you know, action plan, school amendment, and after 2 decades of reform funding, as the Gabor said, why still Roma children and disabled children and migrant children are being separated and placed to lower track schools and classes, you know? So this bring the question, and I came along to one important research from Emil Bruno, which was done in Hungary with the teachers. And we know that, you know, the discrimination is illegal. We know that, and why does? But the question is why it's still happening. It is marked as a discrimination based on the color, ethnicity, disability, religion, and someone would say they discriminate us because they hate us, you know. But this is not always the picture. I will show you. This interesting 2 different teachers, as you see in the boxes, are doing the same thing. One, okay, no, is the next slide, sorry. One is the antagonist who actually hate the others, and he dehumanized the children and dislike them, and they are saying keep them in the place separate. You know, I don't want my child to sit next to Roma. I don't want, you know, my child, they are writing the petition. I don't want actually to build stationary house for disabled children because I don't want my children to see this type of children, people, you know. So this is the one group, but we have a different, another group who are paternalist. Those are the teachers who like the children, but because he dehumanized these children, he's trying to protect them, he's actually harming them the same way as these antagonic children. So actually the result is the same. Separate classes, separate schools for other children, you know, not just Roma, but also disabled and that. And when you think actually what is the motto, why did this is happen? You know, this research of the Emil Bruno, it serves actually as the example why all this is happened. He gave the teachers first test. He gave them actually this, it calls, what's the name? I lost it. The scale of accent of men scale, you know, and he asked them actually to place the, you know, this scale, how they are considered that different nations are evolved, you know, how much are they already human or they are not. And it was very interesting. And then actually they've been given a test, result of test with the different names. Some names were Hungarian, like, you know, the mainstream names, and some were Roma names. And they didn't know that some tested are identical, exact same, you know, answer and you know, all this, you know, exactly same, but they have different names, you know, and they actually marked what they suggest for next education for these children, these students. And it was interesting that those teachers who put the scale of the Roma at the lowest, you know, place, who consider them as the less humans, these were the teachers who actually recommend some low-level education for the same children, and they put like a high level of education for the same, even the tests were identical. You know, so it means actually they consider the majority children as the fully evolved, you know, like a human, Roma children like a less, and it would be same with the disabled and migrant children, because we know that the pattern is actually same. Place Roma child in the front of the system, and he will be marked with a low ability. Disabled child will be marked as the too fragile, and for the ordinary classes, we have to keep them separate because, you know, it can harm it. The migrant children not ready because of the language, you know, all different excuses, but the main, you know, main frame is actually they consider them as the less human as the other children. So let me end with the why, with the answer for the question why all the interventions are not successful. For 20 years almost or more, we have been aiming to fix the Roma problem, not with the system, not with the majority, not with the teacher, but with the Roma. You know, we changed the label. We stopped saying ethnically the different, and we started saying socially deprived. You know, we actually, the ethnic discrimination, we actually hide by socially, you know, the deprivation and social problem. It's not racial problem now, is the social problem. The logic stayed, but the logic stayed the same. The Roma child is still the problem which should be repaired, you know, and this is wrong approach. That's why actually all these interventions are not working. So they end up with a strange situation. The people working on the remedy for discriminations are too often the same people who discriminate the children. You know, the same Ministry of Education who actually introduced the two-way system for special schools, you know, for Roma children, and they are the same who are actually trying to fix the problem, who are actually, you know, doing the information. It's no doubt that, you know, the target group are not the teachers, are not the system, but the target group are the Roma. The Roma are the clients. They are just clients. So once we name this problem correctly, once we see what is the cause of the problem, that the cause is the system, not the child, then we can point the remedy and on the right target. And then for the first time, we will repair the problem instead of reinforcing it. So thank you. I will end up here and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you very much, Miroslav. That's quite shocking, actually. This research, I haven't seen it before, to be honest. Even if it has been done in Hungary, I should have.
Here is actually the QR code, and you can actually make a copy and have a look on this research.
I will have a look. Just coming back to the original question, I mean, I don't want to change too much the subject, but at the same time, I just would like to praise you a little bit because your community work is absolutely excellent. And actually, Miroslav is representing actually, let's say, such a community organization, which is absolutely unique in the sense of how to address education segregation from the point of view of parents, from the point of view of the local community, and not just talking actually to the local stakeholders like the local authority and the school and so on, but really to mobilize the local community and mobilizing actually the parents. So if you're interested actually about the work of Miroslav, I would like to invite you to go to Ostrava. It's a nice city, first of all, and to see actually what Miroslav is doing is absolutely great. So I have been, I had this privilege actually to see this a couple of times. So I'm talking actually about my experiences. Right. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the use of EU funds because Gabor already mentioned it. And some of the colleagues who are sitting in this panel, they have been involved actually in our project, investigating what the EU funds are doing actually with the education segregation and with some other areas as well, like institutionalization and different type of discrimination of marginalized communities. So maybe Gabor, you can start. Just please be brief. Actually, show this additional 3 slides. What happened in Hungary, because the Hungarian case, it's quite unique again, as this is the only case in our, let's say, little history where actually EU funds has been suspended actually because of the identified discrimination of Roma communities. This has not happened in the case of migration, disability or other fields, even if Anna, Camille and other colleagues, they have been working actually on this issue for years, and they were kind of attacking very fiercely actually the European Commission and other institutions actually about the misuse of EU funds. Still not much happened. But in the case of Roma, we had one case where the money was suspended. Gabor, the floor is yours.
It's not fair. You spoiled a big part what I wanted to say. Let me come back. Do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So this is where I stopped, if you remember. So that was the infringement procedure. And there is the parallel story Andor has already mentioned. So the local government has received almost 5 million euros originally to start an integration process in a much smaller segregated area in the city. And they originally promised that everything will be better for those people living there. School circumstances, less living segregation, and so on. But what happened that a big part of them were forced to move from one segregated area to the other one, or they had to leave the city completely. But from our perspective, the most important, what happened to the kids. So all the kids here on the 𝐜𝐻𝐻 settlement, they were enrolled into ordinary integrated schools. But after they were forced to move, they went to the same school, what I was talking about. So the number of those kids in the segregated school, it became bigger, which is impossible. But what happened that there is one guy, he used to be my colleague, although that he always have been a volunteer. So he have never ever received any penny for being a right protector. So he started to ask questions regarding this almost 5 million euros project, and it turned out that there is a big discrepancy between the aims and the actual happenings. What happened? So he wrote to everyone, including the Commission, and as Andor told later on, the money was reclaimed back. Additionally to this, the Hungarian government subsidized the local government in order to be able to pay back the money. Because when everything happened, the money was already paid out. So from our perspective, we lost many times. We lost the money which was stolen. We lost that money which was given as a compensation to be able to pay it back. And we lost everything regarding the effects. So, and him alone could achieve more than the whole local governments, including its background. And what we have been doing, or tiny NGO, it's very simple, that we try to develop that this is a consortium between �ꝑ�𝐲 Association from Hungary, we are the Belgians, Approxima from Portugal, and we are supported by the 𝐜𝐡𝐢𝐥𝐝 University from Budapest. And the aim is very simple, to empower young people from diverse backgrounds, to lead inclusive activities with children, to help schools, and more importantly, communities to reduce segregation and to build more open cooperative learning environments. And to do so, we did nothing else but developed a toolkit. And the toolkit is pretty simple. I brought this to you. This is how it looks on the front page. This is the QR code, and you can find this on our webpage. And we are doing training young volunteers to learn about multiculturalism, communication, and facilitation in order to be able to run small sessions with kids, parents, and actually even teachers, and to have an effect on the ecosystem. Because everyone today, from our side, we were talking about that school segregation doesn't exist on its own. It's always somehow supported by spatial segregation, and it's always there are other stakeholders. I would like to repeat what Kamil said, that kids with disabilities, I'm adding Roma kids or kids from a migrant background, we are many times are separated for the better support. But somehow this better support never exists, miraculously. Yes. And what Miroslav showed, that there are two ways, the honest way and the not so honest way, but both lead to the same willingness of segregation. I'm not sure that he is right, because I'm afraid that even those who try to show them as supportive, somehow it always turns out that they are not supportive at all, and their original aim always was to segregate somehow Roma or migrant or children with disabilities. And that's the picture.
Thank you very much, Gabo.
One sentence. So we developed this toolkit, which is available in 3 languages. And more importantly, we also ran a test, a very tiny test, with 55 participants in 3 countries. And we don't say that we know that this is the answer. We say that this is one of the answers. And we should start working within the communities, even within our Roma communities, maybe to start something better, and to use EU funds in this way, and not like it happened in Nyíregyháza. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yorgos, I would like to come back to you as well because I had to stop you for a second. And my question would be to you, because Greece is a little bit actually the unknown territory, at least for me, but I strongly believe actually for some other colleagues as well. And Camille, please jump in also, because I mean, we need to do more in Greece. That's very clear. Because again, the data availability, let's say the policy actions, we have reviewed a little bit actually the policies in Greece and even the EU funds policies. These are not necessarily, or I'm trying to be polite, not necessarily addressing these questions very well. My question is very simple to you both, actually, what you're planning to do in Greece. Yorgos, you are a lawyer, so most probably you will be, again, focusing actually more on legal actions. But is there any chance that we can step in like a kind of research project to do it together, actually to do more data collection? Maybe there is a point actually to focus on Greece as again, a kind of common policy actions addressing discriminative issues across the board. So it means not just the Roma, but other groups as well. How much you see your role and how much, Camille, you can work actually with Yorgos in another way around, how you see that you can work together. Because again, compared to the Central Eastern European countries, where even considering, let's say, the economic conditions, we see much less actions in Greece than in other countries. Yorgos, please.
Thank you so much for this question, Andor. It is hard to respond to that briefly, but I will do my best to portray the issues that need to be tackled. Well, first of all, yes, Greece, especially with regards to Roma issues, is not on the forefront. This is historical. It has a historical perspective also, due to the fact that the Roma communities in Greece are on the periphery of the Roma movement, as you are pretty much aware. So this also is a very bad mix to the cocktail of human rights infringements. One strategy that we are trying to follow, and I believe that it is the right way forward, is to see segregation not separately, segregation as a systemic justice issue, which is expressed in all manifestations. It's expressed in education, it's expressed in housing, and it's expressed in employment. It is not in my backyard approach, which is culturally, systemically embedded. And I think, first of all, priority should be to revoke and repeal laws either who are portrayed as transitional, for example, as temporary, but actually are not, or provisions that are exclusive for the Roma communities. This carries the historical injustices, which means that there has to be a viewpoint of restorative, even transitional justice mechanisms here, because we have patterns and decades of exclusion, especially in Greece. If I may remind that Greek Roma weren't even recognized as citizens. They were stateless of gypsy origin up until the late 80s. Nowadays, there are also stateless individuals, which also reinforces segregation, due to the fact that there are also non-Greek Roma from even non-EU countries. This complicates the situation because the strategies, the policies do not even view these intersectional dimensions of segregation. So the problem is to expose these issues from a strategic litigation perspective, but also from a policy perspective. The European Commission, I believe, has to understand that there cannot be two speeds of policies. One that adheres with the EU standards of mainstream and targeted, and then the other hand, national policies that perpetuate segregation housing solutions that are transferring one ghetto to another ghetto, excuses and justifications for and fake excuses and cheap excuses of perpetuating school segregation, such as we have heard that as well, that Roma are Greek citizens, so we do not view segregation as such because they are Greek citizens, for example. So there must be a collective effort, of course, both in the domestic level and also in the transnational level, because it's a trans-European, it's a transnational problem and not a national issue. So first of all, the institutions have to understand that we cannot have double standards and double systems in place. These provisions must be repealed because this is the root of the problem. And I think that a very important response is also funding. Funding must be interconnected with certain safeguards. If these causal factors, these historical injustices are not addressed, I think there must be a connection with the release of funding in the true sense of enabling condition, because this we have seen being important in theory, but not enacted in practice. So
Yorgos,
I think we have to address the structural issue.
I need to stop you for a second. I just need actually your commitment that how much you are open to work with 𝐬𝐻𝐸. I'm joking, so don't take me seriously. I mean, my point is that we are, together with Louise and Hasna, we are trying to connect people as much as possible and to make some joint efforts. So as you know very well, because we are running actually now the Equal project together. So you see that it's not something new actually what I'm raising now. But I mean, for example, with 𝐬𝐻𝐸, you have not been working before, right? Okay, 𝐬𝐻𝐸, are you open actually to work with us and together with Yorgos and with some other guys actually to make a bit of revolution in Greece?
Well, we are open to working with everyone who is working for inclusion, and I mean, I don't want to promise anything to anyone, but you know me more than 10 years, so, and we are still talking, so why do you see? We work.
Of course, yeah. Okay, good. No, but this is already a commitment, which is actually just reminding you it's recorded. So
and I mean, you cannot have progress if you work by yourself. You need to join forces.
Perfect.
And it is true. It is true something you mentioned in the very beginning, indirectly, that sometimes we are focusing on our areas, but we are not very intersectional. So, for example, Neil is not doing so much work on Roma with disabilities, even though we know, there is a lot of issues. And I mean, the other way around. And I mean, we try sometimes, but we could do better. So, I mean, yes,
much better.
There is a lot of space there.
There are just a few examples, and actually, Anna mentioned very briefly the link to the institutionalization and education segregation, but further down, actually, Stephen is working very much actually with some Roma lawyers in Hungary, focusing actually on the institutionalization of Roma children. There are lots of things to do.
We also have members working with Roma, like also in Komotini. Yorgos will know there is a very big community of Roma people, and disabled people are Komotini is one of the most inclusive cities in Greece, I think. So it's an interesting case to explore. And I mean, other stuff as well. And finally, and I will stop here, as you know, and I mean, it's not only a Greek phenomenon, I guess, laws are much more inclusive than reality. So this is what we need to change, I think.
Yes, probably. Sorry, Sushila, if I'm pronouncing well your name.
Just wanted to say that, of course, I completely agree with the connecting of the struggles, because they are all connected. It is all intersectional, but also just the connection between the different tools. So we talk about cases, research, community empowerment, all of that, and having the communities lead all of the action, because the shifts that we've seen over the course of history, when you see structural change, it's not just the legal norms, it's all of the cultural, political, national narrative and social shifts that need to happen as well. And we need to use all of those tools. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Look, I would like to invite you actually to look at it, what we are doing actually in the Equal project, because we are calling it, as Hassan presented it actually, as a community-driven strategic litigation. So we would like to also make a little bit of kind of mindset shift, saying that not the lawyers should primarily decide actually where we are heading, but the community should say that. And this is not an easy job. Let's be honest, actually, sometimes the lawyers are, let's say, in the forefront of these decisions. And Joris can tell you lots of stories, not today, unfortunately, but that's how he is exploring actually the issues in the communities and how he is like picking up these things. But this is the same in Hungary or in other countries where we are running this project. Not an easy job, but that's the future for us, this kind of participatory, let's say, democracy type of discussion. That's not, we should decide actually what is good for the community. The community should tell us. All right, that's what we are trying to do. Luis told me that actually there's a question in the chat. Luis, do you mind? Or maybe the person actually who put the question?
I can read it briefly. It was about the provision of funds and monitoring in EU accession countries, which have segregated systems, which they call inclusive systems, like Macedonia. So the question was, I guess, what's being done in EU accession countries like Macedonia or Albania, etc. Whether there's anything being done that our partners would know about here, our speakers.
Is there any opinion actually on this question? Is there anybody actually who can? Yeah, thank you very much, Ishela, for your presentation and for your participation. Thanks. Is there anybody who is working with accession countries? No? I mean, in my best knowledge, actually, segregated education as part of the human rights dossier, it's included actually in the discussions. So, accession countries, they have to address this question when in the course of the negotiations. And if there is any like kind of addressed or modified, then in the course of the negotiations, this is coming, because obviously you cannot be part of the EU if you are not properly, let's say, introducing actually the EU law when it comes to the, for example, the race directive or any other EU law. So, and that's part of the discussion. But we see, even actually in the case of the Central Eastern European countries, that the transposition of the race directive was kind of okay in 2004, 2007. At the same time, when it comes to the infringement proceedings, which had been launched in 2014, 15, 16, that's very clear that Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, they were in a violation of the race directive. That's why actually the infringement proceeding has been launched. So the question is even relevant for the EU member states, that how much actually, from the legislative point of view, these countries, they are following, let's say, the basic legal requirement. Not an easy job. And that is why I would really invite you, and this is my last words, I would like to invite all of us to follow it very closely and to work actually more from the community point of view on these questions, because if we are just expecting actually change or, let's say, real actions from the EU institutions or national institutions, unfortunately, the last 20, 25 years experience shows that it's not happening. So we need to make it, and we need to make the case, let's put it in this way. Otherwise, things will not happen. And our approach, what Hassan presented actually earlier, is to connect organizations and to mobilize the communities as much as possible in an intersectional way. So how much they can work together on these issues and to show that things can be changed, not just expecting actually this type of, I don't know, modifications or actions actually from the national or EU institutions, okay? If there is no any other question or comments, then I would like to thank you actually for your participation and attention. We will continue, we will not give up, and the continuing, it means that we are also working actually on some joint projects again. So some of you have been already invited actually to discuss with us, and please feel free to come to us actually with some additional ideas, comments, suggestions, how to, let's say, facilitate the joint works actually among these organizations and target groups. Of course, it means that we are applying for funds together. We are doing some positions, let's say common position. We are applying actually for some consultations together. So as much as possible, we are reinforcing actually our joint efforts. But again, we are open for any ideas and suggestions. It seems that somebody shared the screen, but I don't see anything on the screen. Is it true that? No. Okay, then this is just not.
I have the same issue, but it's okay. I thought Hasna was trying to share and it was my computer who was blacking out.
That's fine. That's fine. This is clearly showing that this is the end of this webinar. That's even the computer is tired, so it's fine. Okay, I understood the message. Thank you very much again for your participation. We will send you also a few lines actually as conclusions of this. Thank you very much. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you for
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.